Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio.
I think that there is such a hype over Christmas, that it's so built up, and there's so many fond childhood memories that we carry with us of really happy times when we really were satisfied or at peace with everything, that builds up an expectation in our own minds and hearts of, boy, this is going to be really great, and the family gathering will we'll really talk seriously. And there's such a build-up that the actual performance or reality probably can never quite measure up to that. The great gap between our dreams of how our human existence ought to be and the reality seems to be intensified at Christmas time.
Joining Father Bacik in today's Reflections is Sister Pat Schnapp, Associate Pastor at St. Thomas More University Parish in Bowling Green, Ohio. Today's Reflections focuses on the topic of coping with Christmas. Here's Father Bacik.
Pat, I'm glad you agreed to come on the show and to talk a bit about the Christmas season. It strikes me that the time of Christmas is a period when people are feeling emotions very strongly. You take the joyful kinds of spirit. A lot of people really are up at this time. A lot of people are really involved in giving of themselves. I mean, you and I have experienced at our parish people being very generous with their times. We've had parties there for various groups of disadvantaged children and so on. We've seen people give things to the poor. There's a certain spirit of fellowship that seems to characterize the season. People are very interested in reaching out to others. We have the traditional notion it's a time of brotherhood and sisterhood. I think there is a genuine joy that a lot of people feel during this time. The spirit is upbeat in many ways, and I think that's really something to be celebrated about this season. I don't know if you've noticed that in your own life or the people that we deal with or not.
I think there might be a lot of reasons for that. I would agree with you. I think one reason might be that it is a time for family to come together, often from many, many miles, and so there's the element of the family reunion, seeing old friends and family members that perhaps one hasn't seen. I think another element that makes it an upbeat time is that it's a time when we are very deliberately touching down again with friends that perhaps we have not for many months. We're getting cards from them very often with messages that shore us up, that sort of remind us of the bonding that we have with these people that perhaps we don't see too often. There's sort of a built-in unselfishness, I think, even in the element of gift giving, where you see people straining to think of someone else's needs or someone else's likes, people trying to give someone a gift that is particularly appropriate for that person. And I think that sort of builds in a consciousness of the other and a sort of a generativeness and an unselfishness that again probably helps us forget about our own problems for a while.
I suppose there's a cynical view of a lot of that, but I'm not sure that's really on the mark, that Christmas is involved in nothing but consumerism and materialism and buying things and people writing quick cards to people and so on. But I tend to think more in the line that you're enunciating there, that there really is a genuine goodness at the bottom of a lot of it. I like the notion of family that you brought out. I suppose that's the source of a lot of our joys at this time, of being able to be with others and to recall fond memories from the past. That's where we know our support in life, and a lot of warm images connected with family life, I think, around Christmas time that probably buoys people's spirits up. And the card business, as you talk about, we do that in maybe an offhand way often. But again, it's even to have a bond with people at one time of the year. I know there's one girl that was in the parish where I served when I was first ordained, who still writes me every year. I never have any contact with her, never hear from her any other time, and she still mails the card back to the parish where I used to serve.
And reminds you.
Yeah, and then she gives me a little report on how her life is going and how her spiritual life is developing, and it's really a fine thing. One could say, well, I wish I had a lot more contact, or that it's superficial in one way, but on the other hand, it is a certain relationship carried on there that I think has a certain beauty to it. So there is a genuine joy, a religious spirit, I think, in the culture at this time, and that many people feel that. But I think that probably the thing that doesn't get talked about so much, because that is the big thing, peace, joy, happiness, and all this, but is the darker side of it, which is probably more interesting in one way because it's not articulated so much, and that is that people really often feel a certain despondency during this time. It really does work its way into the popular mind. I noted on television the other day, I saw a woman psychologist being interviewed about the fact that many children were depressed during Christmas time, and she was giving ways of parents to try to discern whether their child was depressed or not, and how they might try to end up dealing with that. Now, it's been more commonly known that adults are often depressed. I think that people talk about suicide rates going up, and just a common experience, if people will honestly share something about the period of time, there is a lot of down feeling as well. Maybe some of that happens after Christmas, after that time is over, but I think in the preparation period as well, you'll feel people being overcome by fatigue, perhaps, and not being able to manage things. There's so much of what goes on during this period that does remain superficial. I mean, we were highlighting the positive side before, but there is a way in which there's a disappointment often built in. I mean, you do try to buy the right gift for someone, you give it to them, and they don't have a very positive reaction. Or the family really is gearing themselves up to go to church, and it's going to be a big time, and then on the way things go badly, or there's a fight in the family, or the kids aren't ready on time, and you get there late, and they're cranky in church, and so on, and that becomes sort of disappointing. And sometimes, I'm talking about getting these cards from people, and maybe just the kind of thing you'd like to know what's going on with them, or you wish they'd say something about a previous shared memory that you had, and then you read the card and it's sort of blah because they had 30 seconds to write it in, and you're just getting a little snippet of what's going on in their life. So maybe there's really a lot of things that seem to go wrong during this period, and people's darker side comes out. There's my theory of all this is that Christmas intensifies both the positive and negative feelings.
I would agree with that. I think perhaps there are 2 days in every year which are milestones for each one of us. I would say one is our birthday, and again I think that touches sad as well as perhaps happy chords.
I think that only happens as people get older, right, after a certain age.
I remember when I was young thinking that the years were coming too fast and that I was going to get old faster than I really wanted to get old, and now that I'm middle-aged,
you had a premature midlife crisis is what we call that.
Well, I was in neurotic
but anyway, go ahead with you.
I think that Christmas is the other milestone, and because it is the milestone, and maybe because of its proximity to the New Year too, to our actually writing down on letters and so on, the numbers of a new year. We have a sense of a passage, and combined with the sense of it being, or ideally it being, a time for family and friends to gather, I think that the absences are intensified, and maybe the changes from one Christmas to the next in someone that we have loved are intensified. We notice them at that point, whereas on a typical day we might not reflect on them particularly.
I really hadn't thought of it that way, but I suppose it does connect in with major times when we reassess. And the first of the year, maybe in cultures traditionally, the beginning of the new year has been a time for reassessment and to think in terms of the future and to build up one's energies to take on the future again. It's always been a lot of deep religious sentiment connected with the new year, and perhaps Christmas ties in that way for us as well. I was thinking that what I think is at the bottom of a lot of the bad feeling, the despair, despondency, or even vague negative feelings is the matching of the expectations with the performance. That I think that there is such a hype over Christmas, that it's so built up, and there's so many fond childhood memories that we carry with us of really happy times when we really were satisfied or at peace with everything, that builds up an expectation in our own minds and hearts of, boy, this is going to be really great, and the family gathering will finally, now we'll really talk seriously, and this relationship that hasn't been going so well, we're going to get a healing involved in it, and that I'm going to get gifts that I like, or people are really going to like what I give them, and so on. There's such a build-up that the actual performance or reality probably can never quite measure up to that. And I feel that there's probably a cause there of this vague negative feeling. I think the child psychologist that I saw on television, I don't really remember her name, and I just was watching it in passing, but I know her point was that one of the reasons the children feel despondent at that time is that their expectations have been so high that some reason or another it just doesn't match up with it. So maybe adults begin to feel that in more subtle ways, however. Not just that they didn't get the presents they want. I think that would probably be too crass an explanation of what goes wrong. It's probably more built into the question of personal relationships, and that the great dreams of this time of peace and justice and how everything's going to be fine and so on simply isn't realized again. So we're sitting there watching television as we prepare for Christmas and hearing about our hostages in Iran, or hearing about the threats of war around the world and all of the crises that we face. And again, it's sort of a downer about all that. The great gap between our dreams of how our human existence ought to be and the reality seems to be intensified to me at a time, at Christmas time. Maybe that is one of the deeper explanations, I think, of what goes wrong.
I think psychologists also tell us that we become most optimistic in the planning of something, in futurizing and looking forward to and seeing what the possibilities might be. And in the preparation for Christmas, the possibilities are almost infinite. So many things that we're looking forward to and actively involved in preparing for. And I think even though there might be fatigue accompanying the preparation, that still we're busy, we are active, and therefore the sort of depression that can simply be the letdown, the dropping of our spirits, which can happen when we're completely inactive, doesn't take us over until the day comes, and as the child opens his presents and looks around and says, well, is that all? Is that all I'm going to get? I think there can come a very, very swift anticlimax. The planning is over. The gifts, in fact, do get opened quickly. The meal might take a few hours to prepare, but it does come to the point where it's over. The men retire to watch the football game. Is there football on Christmas Day?
I imagine. Yes.
I imagine there always is football on television. So, and somehow there is this still. There's this quietness, and there's the French proverb, to travel hopefully is better than to arrive. I think it's probably true that anything that we look forward to with a sort of eagerness that we look forward to Christmas can't possibly fulfill our expectations.
And there is then that natural letdown. I mean, even if it was a great day and had all of the fine elements in it that we would want, came very close to our expectations for one reason or another, there's still that letdown that it has passed, and we move into a more routine existence again after Christmas. I think that really is one of the things we see about our human nature, that even if everything is perfect for us, we're sitting there fretting about why we can't make it last, or it's going to go away, or if I could only stop the action here, if it only could always be as good as it is right now, then it would be fine. But there's that nagging thing in the back of the head that says it's going to pass. Tomorrow won't be like today. And even the good fellowship that we had going here probably will somehow get tarnished in the next days, or there's going to be an argument, or we'll get back to normal, and normal isn't all that great. So I think the very ending of it, the very fact that you move from a high point onward, it really is difficult. I think we're talking here very optimistically about people in a way who take Christmas seriously, but there's another whole side to the culture I think needs to be brought out, and that is that very often the point of the whole thing is missed. That is peace and fellowship and harmony that seems to be at the center of this feast is lost, and it does become nothing but consumerism. And let's buy more things, and people get caught up in the rat race, and they don't ever get around to really preparing for Christmas. It's just too much to think in spiritual terms or for a deeper meaning of the holidays. It really does become a materialistic or pleasure-seeking thing. It's a round of parties, it's impress other people, it's spend more money for gifts, and you can get caught up in all of that too, and you begin to wonder how much all of us are touched by that in the culture. I sometimes think that it's one of the hardest spiritual seasons, that is Advent, to really make work right. You really have to fight for it in a sense, because so many things in the culture are in opposition to it. On the other hand, I think maybe that's one of the reasons that people find Advent to be one of the more rewarding seasons. That is, many people really do make that struggle. They're trying to meditate or reflect or read the scriptures or set time aside or be more generous and so on. And I think that maybe it's because you have to really work for that kind of thing that Advent becomes a good season. I think Advent is a good liturgical season in the sense that people get into it. They participate in it. Somehow the lighting of the Advent wreath in the church, or the liturgies, the kind of music we have, the special readings from Isaiah and so on, seem to have a power to grab people. But on the other hand, the point I really was making there was to say the culture is often against us, and obviously Christmas is going to be a downer if you miss the whole point of it, which is got to do with peace and harmony and the coming of the kingdom and so on. I think what we need to do is to take all that analysis of what's going on with many of us and to try to place it into a Christian framework, because I think it all has meaning. I think even the good and the bad has a great deal of meaning for us, and it is the very story about Christmas, I think, that helps us put it into perspective. My sense is that all of our deeper feelings are intensified, and there's two kinds of things that are going on here. One is a kind of ecstatic experience. That is where we're lifted out of ourselves, where we're really in tune with the higher powers, where we're really following out the will of the God who is responsible for all of this world. And the other kind of experience is the sense of limitation, what I often call the boundary experience, where we run up against our limits, can't get beyond them, and feel our finiteness to very high degree. Now, I think both those kinds of experiences can be articulated or seen better in terms of the fundamental story of Christmas. And that story tells us that the great God has come near to us, that the mystery of life that surrounds us doesn't remain vague and remote, that the God we believe in isn't someone far out up there in the sky who just peers down now and then, but it is a God who has come and, in the words of John's Gospel, pitched his tent among us, come and lived our existence, come and lived personally in our midst, so that Jesus of Nazareth becomes our access to the Father. We look at Jesus and know something about what our God is all about. So it's a feast of nearness in a way. It's a feast in which God becomes very close to us, and that is what begins to transform all of this that is human. I should try to make that concrete in a way. Some people I know will go through the negative experiences of Christmas and be very upset with it, thinking, hey, there's something wrong with me, or I'm not really into it. Or I have lost my ability to be a child anymore. I can't find an adult meaning in Christmas. The only time I'm happy with Christmas is when I look at the kids open their presents. The rest of the time, I'm just not in it or with it. I'm not wholehearted about it. Well, people will feel bad about that. In fact, I know people who have read an article that I wrote recently on this negative side of Christmas have told me they felt very good about it. They were buoyed up because it articulated something they're feeling. And what I think is important here is to see that sense of limitation that we're describing is very human, that it can be accepted, and that it itself can be transformed because the God who has come and lived among us has shared all of our existence. He's taken on our joys and sorrows as well, and that when you read through the infancy accounts, you see a lot of limitation there. You find all of the struggle of Joseph and Mary to try to figure out what this is all about. You find that notion of the sword of sorrow is going to come. You find people not responding positively to the message, like Herod is representing the leadership in Jerusalem, not responding favorably. And so I think what that tells us is somehow that we as humans are acceptable, that all that we go through, all the deeper and darker emotions that we often feel funny about or don't want to tell anybody about, are okay, that that's part of God's plan. It's built into our own limitation as human beings. And just to accept that very often is freeing. So I had one woman tell me that after reading this, she felt she could get through Christmas much easier because she could be at ease with her genuine feelings.
Perhaps that's why we love Scrooge. We sometimes sort of playfully mimic him, but I think there's a part in all of us at times that says, bah, humbug, and that's what we can most relate to, and he said it for us, and he was just so much meaner than we are that it's sort of good to have Scrooge in our mythology about Christmas.
Yeah, the Christmas Carol. Yeah, I wonder, that is popular and strikes a responsive chord in people. I suppose part of that is the conversion of Scrooge eventually that makes the story even more complete and compelling for many people. But I think you're right. Very often we need somebody or something that will allow us to face that negative side and to know that it's all right and that somehow it's encompassed by a larger love. And what I'm getting out of this notion of incarnation, that's what Christmas is saying, is incarnation. It's terribly physical and real. It's one of the things I like about the Virgin Mary in the stories of Christmas. Somehow to me she brings the gospel down to earth. When you start to think of Mary, you're thinking of a young girl very perplexed by this message of the angel that she's going to be the mother, Jesus. And you think of a young girl pregnant and out walking in the streets. I think of swollen ankles and lower back pain, as one of our colleagues was commenting on Mary. You think of a woman who went through all of the travail of the birth and of the raising of a child. The sword of sorrow indeed did touch her own heart. She thinks of the misunderstanding she had with her own youngster as to what he was all about, and seeing him, of course, executed as a common criminal or political revolutionary. So that somehow the figure of Mary makes all of the gospel, which can easily float off into the sky and seem unreal and talk of holy places and holy persons, she brings it all down to earth in some way for me. And that's what I'm saying here, is incarnation is all about that. And it allows us to take our own earthiness, our fleshly character. Jesus is son of David according to the flesh, Paul says in the first chapter of Romans, according to the flesh. And I think that enables us to deal better with our own humanity as we find it.
And perhaps also with the negative feelings that surface at this time. We aren't angels. We aren't beings from another planet that don't feel, that don't get frustrated and perhaps grumpy and overly tired and so forth. I think you're right.
Fatigue and all that is built into it. Let's go back to the ecstatic side. I focused on the negative side, the boundary or limit situation that we find, which I think is rendered all right or manageable because of the message of Christmas. But it also tells us about the joys and the deep peace that is able to come to us. That it tells us again that some of our best moments are when we are giving of ourselves, when we are thinking of others. One of the neat things about Christmas is it has the power to lift us out of our own egocentrism, get us out of our selfishness and force us to think about our friends, our family, of giving to others. And that really is a healthy thing about that. And I think most of us, if we look at our experience, will say, hey, I felt my best then. I was really good then. I was at peace and I wasn't so worried about my own self and my own problems. And what Christmas reminds us, I think, that all of that ecstatic feeling, the good, joyful feeling, has its source in the great God. That the God is the one who is at work in our world. He's the source of the energy. It's the reason we feel good is because we've moved closer to that God in some way. We've imitated the life of his Son, Jesus of Nazareth. So the coming of Jesus, the incarnation, again, properly locates our joys. It tells us, really, that we are not self-made persons, that we are not autonomous individuals, that we're best off when we're relating in a healthy way to other people. So maybe what it leads practically to is for people to say when the good times, thank you. When you look at the smiling faces of the children, that, boy, that's God, what a gift you have given to us. When we feel united, we're at worship on Christmas and things are going well, that we stop and remember how much we have received. I notice many people I've talked to over this time do have a good sense of that, of saying, boy, even in the midst of tragedy, telling me, boy, there's much to be thankful for. I know I was talking to a man the other day whose two parents were in a terrible car crash, and they were all beat up and messed up and everything, but they're in the hospital, and they're just getting out of intensive care, and someone was saying to him, boy, this would be a crummy Christmas for you, and he told me that he told him, no, it won't be, because we are so thankful and grateful that we have our parents with us yet, and we can still celebrate this Christmas with them. So it seems to me that's a proper way of locating our joys and peace in life.
I would agree, and this all relates back to the Incarnation, and the gift of God to us, our salvation, which in turn causes us to, as you put it, leave aside our egocentrism and reach out in the gifting to other people. And I think our concrete gifts tend to be symbols of the gifts that we are to one another throughout the year, only wrapped a little differently.
Pat, I think what we're after in this whole thing is to point out the great value of Christmas in really teaching us lessons. It heightens all of our feelings. Some of our most joyful times occur right in this Christmas season, and also some of our most difficult times. What we're trying to say is that all of that is part of being a human being. It tells us about ourselves, that we're limited creatures, and yet we have the opportunity to reach out and to come closer to our God. And all that is based on the really important message of the whole Christmas season, that the great mystery that surrounds us, the gracious God, the one we call our Father, has not left us orphans, and he doesn't remain distant from us, but he comes and lives among us, and is personally present to us as the source of our joys and as the power in meeting all of our struggles and difficulties.
You've been listening to Reflections with your host, theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio. Joining Father Bacik in this discussion was Sister Pat Schnapp, associate pastor at St. Thomas More University Parish in Bowling Green, Ohio. The topic of this week's Reflections was coping with Christmas. If you have any questions about today's program or any ideas for topics you'd like to hear discussed, please write to Reflections in care of WLQR, Toledo, Ohio 43623. Produced in the studios of WLQR, Reflections is directed by Mark Ferguson. Executive producer is Mary Beth Kirchner. Reflections is brought to you by the Genesis Radio Network.